a World War II veteran who was wrongly accused and incarcerated, African American, during a POW camp revolt in Italy in World War II, and in the hysteria is swept up and incarcerated for a year. Years later, in fact, just this year, so that's some 60 years later, a review of the records, the Department of Defense realizes that it made a mistake. They reversed his dishonorable discharge. They made it an honorable discharge, acknowledged that the U.S. Army was wrong, and 60 years later returns to him the back pay that he would have earned during the 1 year of incarceration, $720. Now, that's just plain wrong that someone is denied that and is given $1944 without compensation for at least the cost of living adjustments, which would only be $8,000 in today's dollars.
Senator Nelson, I'm going to, excuse me for interrupting, I'm going to run and vote and come back. If no one's here when you need to go, just recess.
I'll recess, I will.
Thank you for raising this issue, however.
Yeah, yes, sir.
The importance to the committee.
Now, of course, I appeal to you as Secretary of the Army, and then you said you did not have the legal authority. I appealed to the Secretary of Defense, and he said he did not have the legal authority. As a result of that, I've filed a bill to correct it. But it seems to me that under equity and fairness, an issue that we are addressing here about health care for wounded warriors, that under equity and fairness, a warrior has been wounded by taking away his most prized possession, which is his honor and his liberty, and 60 years later, that the U.S. Army and the Department of Defense is saying that they don't have somewhere in the bowels of the Pentagon the ability through equity and fairness to adjust $720 back pay. Can you share with me, Mr. Secretary, what you think we ought to do to right this wrong?
Yes, sir. I'm glad to. I reacted exactly the same way you did when I learned of this. I'd go so far as to say it's a travesty of justice. $720 today is nothing compared to what what that soldier went through and what he suffered, and certainly what $720 would buy you in 1944 and what it would buy you today, it's no comparison at all. When I learned of this, I asked our lawyers to figure out some way to fix this, some way to address this, and they kept coming back and saying there's no way to do it. We looked at a couple of different ways, and unfortunately they kept coming to the same conclusion, and the OSD lawyers agreed with the Army lawyers that under the current statutory framework we're prohibited from deviating from that schedule. So I'm glad that you've introduced a bill, and I would like to hope there's a speedy consideration of it so that we can right this wrong and try to do what we can to compensate this soldier for what he suffered.
Senator, if I could raise an issue. If he was dishonorably discharged, he would not have been eligible for VA benefits back then. So why don't we check in and see if there's some way that we can look at that situation now that it's been corrected, and the VA may be able to assist in.
Okay, Mr. Secretary Mansfield, we'll do that, and thank you for that suggestion. Samuel Snow naturally is getting on up there in years, and he lives in Leesburg, Florida. Here's what, I would pursue this with great vigor because this is somebody who has been wrong. But the reason I'm bringing it up to you all is that, again, it's another indicator of the cold, hard, impersonal rules and regulation on something that is obviously wrong. We've seen this in Samuel Snow's case. We've seen it in how some of these veterans have been handled. We've seen it, for example, in that veteran from Winter Haven, Florida, that was lost in the system. The military discharged him, had no indication that he had TBI because they didn't ask, they didn't probe, and so he's out there on his own. And he knows something's wrong, and he goes and gets an appointment after waiting over at one of the VA hospitals at Bay Pines, and then he finally gets there after waiting a couple of months, and then they say, well, we can't handle this, you have to go to the Tampa Haley Hospital, and of course that's another waiting period, and somehow this veteran knew to call me. And of course, the minute we found out what happened, he had appointments in the Haley Hospital in the TBI Center the next day. There's something cold and hard and impersonal that we have to break through, not only the subject of this hearing on wounded warriors, but on the treatment of people like Samuel Snow 60 years ago, that his country didn't treat him right. And 60 years later is giving him a check and say, go away. It's wrong. It ought to be corrected.
Senator, I would tell you that we are working hard to correct that. I would agree with you that it's wrong. We, as I stated in my opening statement, need to ensure that each one of these individuals that steps up, raises their right hand, puts themselves in a position to defend this country and put themselves at risk, deserves timely access to every benefit that this nation has promised them. And we're working together as hard as we can to make that happen. And I would make the point in regard to the person you mentioned, you know, with that situation and others, we have changed the rules and regulations to make sure that people with these issues get taken in quicker and sooner and are seen. And I would tell you also that everybody that comes to us is screened for TBI and PTSD, and we're working with DOD on follow-up issues to do that. But I would agree with you, sir. We've got two of the biggest bureaucracies in the world that need a little shaking to make sure that they know that we're dealing with people.
Senator, let me also emphasize, as you and Secretary Geren agreed, ultimately the issue with Mr. Snow is statutory. If the Congress were willing to give the Secretary of Defense discretion in cases like this, as it has given him discretion in waiving repayments, which we have used extensively, we would be able to avoid the situation. But it is ultimately not a rule or regulation in Mr. Snow's case. It is the law, and we are stuck.
Well, if it is the law, we will change it.
My plea, sir, is for broad discretion as opposed to the rifle shot, because then you can deal with the unanticipated situation, just as you have advocated, and we would like to be in that position.
Now, it's hard for me to believe that the Department of Defense, in the enormity of its resources and rules and regulations, that there is not discretion somewhere to correct this wrong. The Secretary Mansfield has said already there's another avenue that we might explore with regard to maybe he hasn't been advised of veterans' benefits that would be available to him since he had been wrongly, dishonorably discharged. And we will pursue that. I wonder why we had to come to United States Senate hearing to get to that. But in the meantime, since I have to recess this hearing so that I can go vote, I wish you all in the recess would confer with your assistants and see if there might be any other little angle that we haven't figured out.
Well, sir, I can assure you we have pushed this within our legal system as hard as we can, and I know you get two lawyers together, you get two opinions. But unfortunately, we continue to run into the same statutory interpretation. If someone could help us see it differently, we'd be glad to. I can assure you, we all feel the same about that case and want to help him, and appreciate your advocacy and your interest in addressing it statutorily. We believe that's where we are. And we sent it back and sent it back and sent it back and kept getting the same answer. And we want to see it fixed as well.
The committee will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.
Thank you.